house and pack the kids up and do all this. And at one point, one of our daughters told us that, oh, you know, Dad, we stopped making good friends because we know we're going to be moving soon anyway. So we moved to Charlottesville in 2002 to raise our children here, and the promise that we made our youngest, who's Michaela, who was elementary school, 4th grade, was that we would stay in Charlottesville until she graduated from high school. We guaranteed her that she'd be from someplace. And she graduated from UVA 6 years ago, and we're still here and hope to be here for a long time. So, good morning, good afternoon, since it's right at noon. So that's the background. So my job as a news director is I'm responsible for all aspects of the news operation, from budgeting to hiring to content are the general rules. And content is what I wanted to talk with you guys about today, because that's one of the things that you can get involved with. So first on the list is what makes something newsworthy, and Media College came up with a list that said there's 5 things to talk about when you're talking about what makes something newsworthy, and that's really the beginning of the conversation on how you're going to manage this for your own entities. You're going to have both positive and negative news potentially, and the question is, what makes it news? Why is it news? Why is this important and that's not important? Media College says there's 5 things: the timing and immediacy, significance, prominence, proximity, and human interest. So the timing and immediacy is that makes sense. News is happening now. It's happening. It's about to happen, and to get involved with that and understand that there's a story. If it happened today, it's a much bigger deal than if the same thing happened 2 weeks ago and we're just finding out about it. If it happened 2 weeks ago and it's not hugely significant, we probably don't care. But if it's happening today, and I'll give you an example. Dairy Market is doing a thing with kids today where they're painting mini pumpkins. It's a fine story to go to. We're gonna have a nice time with that story today. If Dairy Market 2 weeks from now sent me something that said 2 weeks ago we did this, we're probably not going to cover it. So the timing and immediacy matters. Significance matters. That's a very interesting thing. What's the significance? Sometimes with businesses, what's significant inside of your business may or may not be significant to different news organizations. And different news organizations have different meters for this. For instance, your CEO wins an award for something inside of your industry that's like a big deal within the industry that nobody else has ever heard of. That's a big deal for you, probably not something that we're going to be as interested in, but the business section of the newspaper is probably going to be real interested in that. So that's the significance thing. Think about who this is significant to and why, and you really have to cast a jaundiced eye on that sometimes, because you never want to promise your boss that you're going to get a bunch of news coverage for him and then not be able to deliver on that. So think about what's the significance of that. Proximity. In our newsroom, we try and avoid the word local in our copy, in our scripts, because it doesn't really mean anything. Local in Palmyra is not local in Stanton, and we cover at least those 2 marks all the way in a big circle. I mean, our coverage technically goes from as far north as Culpeper down into Nelson County, east to this half of Louisa, and west to Stanton and just beyond. So local is one of those things. So proximity is important too. If you're reaching out to us, to the other local media in this community, that's smart. You're probably going to get less traction the further away you go. What may be newsworthy in Charlottesville to a news department, it's probably not going to be something that the Richmond guys are going to respond to, the Harrisonburg guys or the Roanoke guys. So think about that as proximity is part of how we look at it. In the same way that if somebody from Richmond sends us something that would be interesting if they were in Charlottesville, we're probably not going to do it. We're not going to drive to Richmond to do that story. Prominence, that's an interesting thing here too, because if you have event A and the person that's headlining it is somebody we've never ever heard of, but if it's somebody that we have heard of, a famous person, right? Again, prominence. So think about when you're looking at, is a news organization, and I think this is important, is it newsworthy? Prominence is part of that. And then human interest, and that's sort of the wild card in this. The best example I have of that is we did a news story during the pandemic that wasn't particularly, the timing and immediacy wasn't there, significance, you could argue proximity, okay, it was local. Prominence, no, not at all. This was a 6-year-old, and who generally, right, 6-year-olds aren't newsworthy. But the human interest part was because even our own 6-year-olds. This was because this was a young man that at the beginning of COVID couldn't go to school anymore, and the thing that he missed most was standing up at the beginning of the day and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So his family happened to have a flag out on their front porch, and this young man started every morning walking out to his porch and saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag by himself. Yeah, see? Timing and immediacy, he'd been doing it for weeks. Significance, no, that doesn't change your life. Proximity, yeah, it was here. Prominence, absolutely not. Human interest, absolutely. So that's the sort of the wild card in all of this. So then the question becomes, how do you get your positive news stories covered? If you have something going on with either your business or your organization that you care about, how do you get them covered? Well, go through that list and ask yourself seriously, does it meet any of these newsworthy hits? And if so, what are they? And think about those and build your pitch to that. So the first question is, who do you contact? How do you contact? Well, you notice at the bottom of the list, at the very bottom of the page, there's an email there, newsdesk@NBC29.com. That's our general email. That comes into every reporter, every producer, and myself all see that. So that's the generalized, everybody gets it email. That's the smartest one to use if you want to do a broad pitch. And the key influencers in the newsroom aren't necessarily the anchors. You see, like Steve Casey, like, well, I know Steve and I know Casey, and I'll get them to pitch this. Well, they come in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We've already made our news decisions by then. The other person, and no offense because there's one sitting next to me, is our sales reps. There's a separate, we were talking about this just before the meeting, there's a separation of church and state in our business, in that the sales side and the news side are very different things, and it's done that way for a variety of important reasons, ethical reasons. What the sales side is doing should not influence what the news side is doing. For instance, if you look and say your largest advertiser has a scandal, they don't get to squash the coverage of there being a scandal because they're a big advertiser. You need that separation of church and state. And we take that very, very seriously. News makes its decisions based on newsworthiness, not on, are you UVA Health, or a big car dealer, or fill in the blank. So who to contact, not an anchor, not a sales rep. Reach out to the news desk, reach out to the individual reporters if you have a working relationship with them. If they've covered you in the past and they're still here, and our reporters cycle out about every 2 years. So we were talking earlier about a Vanderloon story that had been done with one of our reporters, but by the time the company wanted to reach out, that reporter was already gone, it was another person. That's the advantage of the news desk, is that everybody gets it. So when to contact? You can be too soon or too late. If you're too soon on a contact, if you're months out, we're going to lose that email, right? I mean, how do you orchestrate all that? If you're too late, if you send me an email today saying at 1 o'clock we're going to have this great event, we've already planned our day, our people in motion, and unless it's, the world's on fire, we're not going to drop everything to go do that. So what's the sweet spot? The answer is about a week. 5 days is my preference. I keep a schedule of story ideas that are one for each day of the week, and when I got to today, and today's Tuesday, I cleared out Monday. So if tomorrow somebody sends me something for next Monday, it gets dragged into the Monday folder, and we've got it as part of our considerations. So about 5 days out. And how to contact? Email. That can reach lots of people. It gives us all the information that you should have in there in one place. It's easy to find and share. You may call if you want, particularly if you have a relationship with somebody, calling is fine. But the politicians are especially bad about this. Senator so-and-so is going to be in Charlottesville 2 days from now, the phone call goes. Then they'll call us 3 times the day before and 3 or 4 times the morning of. And by about that 4th call morning of, we're rethinking even going at all. Kind of annoying. So if you know somebody, reach out to a phone call and say, hey, I've got this thing, I'm going to send you an email, because they want to be able to organize their day. The reporters look at it and say, they have to do 2 stories every day. So how do they organize this? How do they keep this for themselves? We go to a morning meeting every morning at 9:30, and the reporters are supposed to have story pitches. Here's what I'm suggesting we cover for today. So they have to have story ideas. So they need to be super organized, and that's why the email makes it just so much easier to do. And when you're trying to pitch these positive stories, know what to say. Who, what, when, why, super important. And get to the nugget. Give us a reason to care. Don't bury what should be newsworthy 6 paragraphs down. What's the text abbreviation? TLDNR, too long, do not read. You know, that applies too if somebody's scanning a press release and you've gone through 3 paragraphs and you still haven't figured out why it matters. And it could be there, it could be in the 7th paragraph, but you're probably not going to, can't guarantee that we're going to get 7 paragraphs deep. So think about it, give us the nugget and give us who, what, when, where, why, and all of that. A critical mistake that I see get made too often in that is you will send out this amazing press release. It has all the reasons why we should care. And we call, we act, right? I mean, this is like a sales relationship. You're selling something to us, the client says, yes, I want to buy. We're the journalists, yes, we want to do this story. And we call you and say, hey, you sent us this press release about this really cool thing. What time can we come by and talk to somebody today? Oh, nobody's available today. I mean, nobody here is from UVA law, correct? They do it all the time. Here's a great story. Great, we want to talk to somebody. Yeah, they're away for a week. Well, why didn't you send it out next week when they get back? Because it probably had legs to last that long. The opposite side of that is UVA Health. You'll see a ton of stories about some research that UVA Health has done. Because they figured out 4 years ago about, here's an amazing thing, here's why it matters, bunch of extra information, and at the very bottom it'll say, Dr. So-and-so is available between 10 and 3, and here's the direct number to get them. That's some low-hanging fruit for us, right? You know what? If you caught my attention with the first thing, new drug research at UVA suggests that Alzheimer's disease can be treated with sushi, right? Okay, I'm interested. That matters. That affects a lot of people. It gives me a reason to care. And at the very bottom, you're going to say, here's the person you need to talk to. Here's how to get a hold of them without having to jump through all sorts of hoops. Super, super important. So if it's your news release, you absolutely have to have somebody available. And they may be that day, and it may be the next day, it might be 2 days from now, but as soon as that press release goes out, you need to have somebody that's available if the phone rings in 10 minutes, because it might. And that's your one chance. Part of the reason why, as broadcasters, we're hesitant to do the stories that, like the UVA law is the example, that they gave you the whole story in the press release, and the print guys can then write a story from that. But we need sound, we need somebody on camera. And if the print guys do the story today, I'm probably not going to want to wait till next week and look like I'm a week late and cover the news. There's a little bit of ego in that, but that's the reality of it. If you're managing a positive story where you're not the one that sent out the press release, if there's a story, again, I'm sorry, your first name?
Jessica.
Jessica. It's from Vanderlyn. Vanderlyn is a recycling company that we've done, I don't know how many stories about over the years, tons. And we were talking just before the meeting about there had been some new studies that came out that said only 5% of plastic actually gets recycled. And we were just sort of having a conversation. I'm like, do you agree with that number? And she's like, yeah, and for a variety of reasons. That's not a story that she would have sent a press release out on. But frankly, it was one of the stories that has sort of been on my radar of like, do we go do this story and see if it's true here too? She didn't send a press release out, but if we call and say, hey, we're seeing this, does this make sense to you? Do you agree, disagree? What does it mean? Any implications? How do we make this newsworthy? How do we localize this? She didn't send a press release out, but if it's a positive story that you think that you can effectively help tell and explain and maybe move the ball forward towards, better recycling percentages, then it's, make somebody available. Make somebody available. And it's like, we can, before COVID, we had to come out there and sit down with you in front of a TV camera and do it all that way. There was travel time and involvement and lights. Now, in a pinch, we can still do it through our computers. We learned that in COVID, it still exists, and it's a convenience. So you have somebody that can sit at a laptop for 10 minutes and answer questions about, just like you did. Yeah, well, this number of plastic is great. This number of plastic is also great. These two in the middle, they're troublesome, but we're working on this. I'm sorry?
Contamination.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of, there's like 3 or 4 stories in that can all be part of this. But if we call and it's a positive thing, it's something that you think that you can benefit from, find somebody that can talk. Managing a negative story. There's 3 mistakes I want you to think about avoiding when managing a negative story. You've had something happen in your business or your organization that is not great news. Whether it's an industrial accident, whether it's an arrest of somebody, whether it's you're a bar in the downtown mall that happened to be where somebody decided to shoot somebody else, right? You have this negative story, potentially negative story. The 3 mistakes to not make. 1, don't turtle. Don't pull your head in and pretend that it's not happening. Don't ignore us. That does not make us go away. You can manage this situation, or you can let us manage it. If you have the wherewithal and the right people and the right positioning from a variety of things, and your lawyers may get involved in this, your business partners may get involved, but don't turtle. Ignoring us does not make us go away. If you say we're not going to talk, and we aren't even going to answer your calls, we're not going to respond in any way, we're still probably going to show up and take pictures of your building. And I will tell you, Murphy's Law, I had a conversation with somebody the other day about this here, and this exact same point. I said, this was a person that ran a big investment business. They handled big dollars, big clients. And I said, Murphy says, if something's happened with your business, and we call you up and say, we understand that the SEC is investigating you guys. No comment, no comment, no comment. We're going to come out and we're going to spray your building. And Murphy says, your biggest, most pain in the rear end client, your most high maintenance client, will be walking out of your front door that very moment that we're recording that. And then they're going to be on television, and the situation's just gotten worse. So don't turtle. It's not going to make us go away. Don't assume it's just one reporter. If you get a call from somebody about a story that's happening, there's probably other people that know about it. You need to start planning right away. How do we do this? How do we manage multiple people? You can't say, well, I've already talked to one entity. We're not going to talk to anybody else. It doesn't work that way. Now you're turtling to the others. Be smarter than that. And third, don't lie. Ever, ever, ever. You're always better off, and this flies in the face of what I just said, you're always better off saying nothing than saying something that you know is not truthful, because that will always come back and get you. Always. And so, and I've seen people try and do it, lie their way out of something. We have no idea what you're talking about. Okay. It's going to come back and get you. So what's the best first step in handling media attention? If the conversation is there's a reporter on the phone for you, what do? The answer is you talk to the reporter. figure out what it is they're calling about. Figure out if it's a good news story or a bad news story, or it's going to be easy or not. Don't say, well, there's nobody here, we can't talk to you. Have your folks trained to just gather the information. Who are you? What are you calling about? What's your story? What are you trying to get? You know, do you need video? Do you need sound? What do you need? That person doesn't need to say anything to them. They need to gather the information and immediately have somebody that they can go to inside your organization that can help make the decisions about how this gets handled next. But you need to call that reporter back within about a half an hour. Reporters work on very tight deadlines. If a reporter calls you at 10 o'clock that morning, thanks. If you come out of our morning meeting at 9:30, by 10 o'clock there's a list, they call at 10 o'clock. They have to have that story done by about 3 o'clock that afternoon. 3:30, 4 o'clock at their latest. So they're working on very tight deadlines. So call them back within that half hour and be smart about what you're saying. You can deflect. You don't have to say something that you don't want to say, that your attorneys won't let you say. An example, there's a high school in Albemarle County where there's been a whole, the junior varsity football team ran into issues. We know what the issues are. It was a hazing incident involving students. It gets way more graphic than that. There have been some media entities that have beaten up on the school system for not coming out and explaining exactly what happened to whom and why. They can't. This is a police investigation. These are minors, right? These are children we're talking about. You're not going to come out and say, well, John Smith did this to this guy, and here's his picture, right? I mean, your lawyers' heads would pop off. The police department's heads are going to pop off. There are plenty of times where there's not much that you can say. But go back to don't turtle. There are things that you always can say. And I'll give you an example, and I have this written out, and it's actually in the next step, but the following phrase: we are aware of what's happened and want to make sure people are safe and secure. It's a complicated situation. We're working hard to fully understand it. We're limited in what we can say right now, but we'll get back to you as soon as we have a substantive update. Thank you. If you have somebody in your organization that can walk out front of their building and say that in the worst stories, you'll be ahead of the game because you're not turtling, you're not hiding, and in the phrasing of that says almost nothing, right? But I'm telling you, this is part of how you can manage this situation. This is lawyer-proof. You're saying we're aware of it, we're concerned, safety's important. It'd be more newsworthy if you came out and said, "I'm safety," right? And that we'll get back to you when we have something substantive to say, thank you, and turn and walk away. I'll give you a great example of when that didn't happen. Who was here for Rolling Stone article about UVA? Right? UVA turtle. UVA knew the Rolling Stone article was wrong. They knew it before it was published. They knew it when it was published. And their position was, well, eventually that'll come out. And they were right. Eventually it did. And there was a lot of hell that got paid between those 2 points, where there were a lot of concerned parents that were like, what is going on there with UVA and these fraternities and this poor woman? And UVA, according to Rolling Stone, doesn't care. Teresa Sullivan gets on a plane 2 days later and flies over to her speaking engagement in London. The optics are terrible on all this. Finally, they got a dean 5 days later to come out and say, essentially, we're aware of what's happening. We're deeply concerned. Safety is important. It's a very complicated situation. All true, 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 true. And we'll get back to you when we have something substantive to say. Thank you. Turn on your heels and walk away. If Teresa Sullivan had done that on day one of that Rolling Stone article, UVA would have had far fewer bruises in this, and would have been able to point after the fact. We knew it was wrong all along. We sort of were telling you that on that first day, but we couldn't because of legal reasons. It's a complicated situation. It was. It ended up going to federal court for lawsuits. And all those that sued Rolling Stone won because Rolling Stone's article was wrong. You knew it was wrong, but still triggered. Don't do that to yourself. Come out and say something that sounds like this. It gives you the chance to control the narrative a little bit. Because otherwise, it looks like you're hiding, and who hides? Right? You people coming out of court that are doing this, right? The perp walk when they're doing this, right? What do they look like they are? Guilty. Don't make yourself look guilty. Even if you are a little bit, right? Don't make yourself look worse. I didn't do that. So, first steps, take the call, find out what they're calling about, call them back, and have a plan in place. If you're a company that manufactures things, if you're a company that has a workforce that's handling heavy equipment, that's handling saws, that's doing construction work, sooner or later you're going to have an accident, right? You're going to have a conversation now about how are we going to handle that when it happens. Because you're going to have things that you have to manage. There's going to be police, fire, and rescue there. There's going to be reporters there. Somebody's going to have to call this person's emergency contacts. You're dealing with the other people. It's a very complicated situation. That's not the time to figure out what can we say to this reporter that's standing out in our parking lot with a camera taking video of everything that's going on. How do you manage that? Have the plan ready. It'll be on here. Print it out. Take it to your computer. I tell you, I will laugh out loud if I hear one of you guys say. So getting out in front of media things, you've heard me say it 3 times, you're going to need, especially with the TV folks, you're going to need somebody that can go out there and say this, that can be a face of this. Who is that person? It's not always the boss. I've worked for bosses that would be the last person who should go out there because they don't have the self-control to keep it tight. They don't have, there's too much ego there, there's too much of all these things. You need somebody that can go out there that's sort of got some stripes, but not necessarily the boss, to go out there and say what it is you need to say, how it is you need to say it, and stick to the script. Because your lawyer's going to be involved too. And if you're the industrial place that just had somebody cut off their arm with a saw, you're going to get sued. Everything you say matters. So have the script, have the plan, think it out in advance. If you're in financial services, you're probably not going to have the saw accident, but you may have the embezzling accident, right? You may have that financial impropriety thing that may go on. Fill this in for your own business. Fill this in if you're here from a nonprofit organization. What is it that happens? Are you doing something with children? There's a risk. Think about what your plan is to say if that's what happens. Don't wait until it happens to start figuring it out. And remember that leaders are visible, real, quick, and honest. The person that you march out there needs to be all those things. Visible. They're out there. They're out in front, Miss Sullivan. Real, quick, and honest. Teresa Sullivan was all those things. She was real. Well, she wasn't quick. She was honest. She failed on visible and quick. Didn't have to be. So have the plan when news happens to you. Who talks? Who decides what's said? And who's responsible for the action? Don't have empty statements. Then don't lie. If you have zero intention on following this up, don't say you'll follow up. Right? But in a timely manner. That's a weird phrase. You don't have to do anything. So in a nutshell, there's 3 sentences for handling reporters. Sentence 1, media coverage must be managed. 2, it's up to you to have a plan in place beforehand. And 3, be fast, focused, and honest. There's so many horror stories of people not living up to this. I've literally had the following two experiences, especially when I was a producer and making calls and trying to develop a story. I called a business one time and there was something going on, and the person who answered the phone, bless their heart, had been told, under no circumstances are we talking about this. And when I asked them who we could talk to, well, there's no one here. I said, wait a minute, there's no one there? No, there's no one here. I said, so if the building burst out into flames, right after you call the fire department, who would you call? Well, I call John. Give me John's number. Right? I also had somebody one time, and I swear this is true, we had the beginning of the conversation, I'm like, and as a journalist, you get in this habit of, hi, I'm David Foky from such and such a news organization. I found myself, that was so ingrained that if I was calling about getting my car inspected and I was calling University Talk, I'd be like, this is David from NBC. No, I don't need to tell him that. But you get ingrained. So I was like, hey, this is David from, and it was before I was here, from such and such a news operation. I need to talk to somebody about something. And they're like, wait, you need to talk to them about what? And I said it again, and they switched to Spanish on me. And we're like, no hablo. And I'm like, come on. And they insisted in staying in Spanish. My Spanish was not nearly good enough to go, yeah, okay, well, fine. I'll trump that card. Literally, they were like, switched languages on me. You're like, come on. There are tons and tons of stories out there like that. So, again, that's that turtling thing. That's that hiding thing. It didn't make the story go away. So, what questions can I answer? Because that's why I've saved so much time here, because I want you guys to be able to ask about specific examples or ideas or problems or things that you've dealt with in the media that's been annoying.
Well, do you have any Spanish-speaking producers that you could hand the phone to in that case?
We do. It's actually more and more common. Right now I have 2 folks in our newsroom that are pretty fluent in Spanish. It's a hit or miss thing. There should be more, but yeah, we can. And that actually comes into play more frequently when they're out there covering stories, and the community is not an entirely English-speaking community here. So to be able to have that primary language conversation with somebody, or even to verify the accuracy of how something's being translated, is super important. But by the time it gets on the television, we need to have it back in the English in one form or another. Mm-hmm. And then that gets tricky too. How do you do that properly? When with us, most stories are about 1 minute and 30 seconds long. So if you have somebody giving you sound bites and you're speaking in Spanish, do I allow you the whole phrase in Spanish to be broadcast and then mirror that in the same time with an English translation? So then for the people that are Spanish speakers, they can verify that what you said is what I'm saying you said. That soaks up a lot of time. That means every soundbite's twice as long. I can have half as many sound bites in there. Or do I allow you to start speaking, you get the first 3, 4, 5 words, and then we layer in the translation on top of it. And it depends on the nature of what it is you're saying. If you're saying something that is super emotional and super engaged, that I don't want to step on it, that I don't want to be perceived as having been uncaring and just voicing over your voice, I'll probably let it go that way. But we look at those things all the time.
So I have, since you brought up that point, we have a scenario where there are different broadcasts that are out. We're talking from way back. I'm not totally sure on the date because I wasn't with the company at the time, but I think it was 2008. A negative story came out, and our CEO had done an interview with a reporter in order to make sure that the correct story came out. So she didn't turtle at all. Unfortunately, this particular reporter, she had words with them afterwards when it was broadcast, reported that we were closed. Our business is very much open, very much still open, and that is still out there. How do we handle that situation?
Out there meaning it's like it exists on the internet.
On the internet. So we're getting people.
Was it us?
It was you guys and it was the Daily Progress.
All right, well, with us, if it was 2008, it's not, it shouldn't be out there anymore because that video would have come down.
Okay.
But, let's
It's in
just
the
say,
archives, I think,
right,
but yeah.
but we've changed enough stuff that that's probably cycled out and not available anymore. But if it is, and let's say it just happened yesterday, so it's certainly available, that's when you pick up the phone and call and say,
Okay.
here's a mistake, and we need you guys to try and address this. Here's what was said, here's what's actually correct, and then it's up to us as professionals to manage how we do that. Because sometimes it's a really narrow semantic. It's not something as binary as open, not open. Right?
Yeah.
And then we're going to make those clarifications in our stories. And whether that's, like, for instance, we had the shooting on the downtown mall early Sunday morning. We interviewed, we had scene pictures that we acquired that showed the emergency resuscitation efforts in front of business B. But it actually, the shooting happened inside of business A, which was next door. So you could argue that this scene happened in front of business B, when they were simply just happened to be next door to this place. And the business B people reached out to us and said, you're saying, it makes it seem like it happened at our place. And it didn't, it happened next door. We're like, that's a really good point. Our web version, our written web version of that, didn't make that assumptive connection.
Right. And I think it's the web one that still shows that it's
Right.
like archived, and the headline is still Vandalin to close his doors, and that's kind of, it's caused some hesitation for her to, when I say her, I mean our CEO, to reach out for advertising.
We can take that down. I mean, that's the thing. If it's incorrect, my goal, hard stop, is to be correct. Right? Better, the line is better to be second and right than first and wrong. Right? You're going to get a lot of trouble if you're racing to get something on and what you get on is incorrect.
Right.
And so I would rather, we would rather slow roll it and be right, even if somebody else wants to go, oh, we had it first. Okay. But if we have something wrong, and I don't know a media organization in this community that wouldn't react the same way. If they reached out and said, what's on there is incorrect, how can we get this, how can we address this? And I know that we so in the shooting thing, we took the video down. The story stayed up. The story didn't make that assumptive leap. The video, I could see why they felt that way. So we took the video down. Easy.
Okay. And so that was actually part of the reason I wanted to come out and speak to you guys today, was to find out how to correct that, because she addressed it with the reporter at the time. She was very angry because it was something that was done knowing it wasn't true.
Yeah, and so here's the thing. When you're dealing with reporters, especially in this market, you're dealing with 23-year-olds, 24-year-olds. This is their first job in the business. They are still early on in their mistake-making curve.
Right. Well, we knew it was that reporter's fault, so we didn't blame we didn't blame you guys as a whole. I wouldn't be sitting here right now. I'm trying to correct something so that she will allow me to move forward with advertising, and she won't until that's fixed. We're blocked.
And Laura's my boss. She's our general manager. I need her to go like this for just 1 second. I don't care about the advertising. Right? Okay, Laura, you're good. I care about us being right, and what we have is being accurate and true and complete as it can be. The advertising, there's other people that take care of that. That will take care of itself. If we have great viewership, which we do, then all of that will take care of it. My job is to make sure that we have great content with good viewership, independent of all the advertising. That's the separation of church and state. So when you have those situations, there's a me in every news organization.
Right, and we didn't know who to reach out to at that time, so she had just connected with the reporter themselves. Of course, that didn't do any good, so now we're still in this scenario where years later, it's people will still see that when they go online. It's still when you're searching our name, it comes up in the first or second page. Saying we're closed.
That was my question, how to get it off Google.
That's a whole different.
I
can't control Google, but I can.
Stories.
I can't.
Oh, we didn't even realize you guys are still open. We're right there.
Yeah, I can't fix Google, because if I could, I would not be here today.
We have someone here who can fix Google.
But what I can do is make sure that that link is no longer available for someone to go to, so that at some point even the archival stuff of that fails, or that if somebody clicks on that, it's simply not there anymore, or it's been adjusted and corrected.
Okay.
It's super important, and we deal with these issues all the time, and being open to them is critical for what we do. That's the accountability.
I appreciate the way this is handled.
Thanks, I was curious about that too, that when a bad headline comes up, then if you Google the business, it would continue to come up as an issue with the business. If you look up, I'm looking at using this place, and
we're looking at years and years ago, and it still affects us to this day.
Yeah, and there's a cottage industry of people saying that they can get that stuff off of Google for you.
They can't.
Yeah.
We've had multiple.
That is the unintended consequence of this era of public information, is that there is going to be, Google yourself sometime and watch what pops up. I mean, I had somebody accost me on the street a couple of years ago and go, "You were the one that got sued for," and I'm like, oh my God. I was named in a suit for 10 minutes, and it appears online and it's still there. And it's like, okay, yep, I can't do anything about it, but when we can, we will absolutely address those.
Right.
So,
God forbid something like that should happen again, then at least, now I have the contact, know exactly who to reach out to make sure that that's handled.
And I will say, not only the contact, but understand the language that you need to use in that conversation with somebody. There's something about your story that's not quite correct. We're hoping that we can figure out a way to get it corrected or clarified. What can we do to make this happen? As opposed to like the screaming at me in the first 3 minutes of the conversation. It's probably not the best approach, right? But I'm still going to listen. But you're going to have a much better batting at percentage going, I have a concern about the story that you guys did with us. I understand that you're going to cover news and this thing happened. But in your coverage, in your headline, because this is worse than newspapers, because newspapers, headlines are not written by the reporters. There's somebody else that writes headlines, and they were the original clickbait, right? Mm-hmm. The headline is meant to grab. And sometimes, I know plenty of print reporters that have just cringed when they've seen their headlines. Because they're like, that's not what the story's really about. But it's the hook. And so...
It gives the rest of the twist.
Yeah, and then the reporter's the one, because I know lots of reporters. I don't know the name off the top of my head of a single headline writer. So if I was the people that were upset about the headline, the reporter's byline is right there. I'm going to go yell at that reporter. I'm going to go have a fruitful conversation with the reporter. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Really basic question. So I hear you saying send it 5 days in advance, send the news release 5 days in advance, but you're going to be less likely if print reporter gets out ahead of you.
Yeah.
Should we be sending things early or?
Yeah, so for an event.
For an event.
Next Tuesday at 11, we're doing this kind of thing. Now sometimes people will, there's at least one entity in this community that loves to like fill the gaps in their news coverage with stuff like, and a week from now this will happen.
Yeah.
No, we do previews on some things where there's a call to action or a chance for you to get involved in something. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't spoil it.
Okay.
It's just give us enough time to like get it into the mill, but not too much time that it gets lost, or too little time, because remember that event that you sent me something at 12:15 about that happens in 16 minutes? Yeah, I'm still not getting it.
Yeah. All right.
So should there be kind of like a news segment if we're going to do it, if we want to have an announcement to kind of a pre-announcement to let folks know about the event?
Give me an idea, give me an example of what you're talking about.
So grand opening business grand opening.
Mhm.
So there's to be a story to kind of get people aware of the grand opening that is coming, and then to have someone actually on site day of.
Yeah,
Is
so-
that possible?
Yes, it is, but remember, you're gonna have to get past the timing and immediacy. You can get, okay, this is happening on Tuesday at 1. Significance, that's gonna be trickier for business opening, because lots of businesses open.
Oh, I'm pretty certain this one's a business.
Right, but and I'll give you a prominence. There's a former UVA basketball player who opened a hamburger place in town and got a ton of coverage. Like if it had been you or me opening the hamburger place, right? I'm not Ralph Sampson. Ralph Sampson's Ralph Sampson, and his name's on this, and therefore it got more attention than probably it deserved. It's a hamburger place, and the guys at Five Guys must have been like, "What?" Right? Here we are. So that's the thing that you have to like. We get a lot of business opening announcements and ribbon cuttings and groundbreakings. For the most part, they don't get covered. Some of them, because they're not significant, no offense, they're not significant, they're not super important. It's a big deal for you, but the community as a whole, right? But there are a bunch that should have gotten covered, and somebody just didn't form it well enough in their pitch to say, here's why this matters. So think about like, when you're selling this to us being the media as a whole, not just NBC 29, what's gonna make us care? What is significant about it? What's gonna make me go, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. And if you can get to that, get to the nugget, get me to the 6-year-old on the front porch with his hand over his heart, right? Get me to that, and you're going to gain ground that you wouldn't otherwise gain.
What about if you're going to do a story about the pumpkins at the dairy market today, and you've planned it, and you've talked to these people, and everything's happening, and everyone's happy, and it's planned. What happens if the huge story pops up?
Yeah, we never promise coverage. My line has for years and years been, if the White House called and said the President of the United States is going to be in our lobby in an hour, my answer is, we'll try and get a camera there. Never promise, because you're always at the risk of something big. Like, if a plane crashes into the rotunda, we're not going to the pumpkin thing. Right? And if I promised the pumpkin people that we'd be there, promised. Now I could say we hope to be there, we plan to be there, we intend to be there. A lot of folks do that. But I'm never going to say, yes, we absolutely will be there. Please tell the White House we'll try and have a camera in our lobby in an hour for the president, independent of who that president may be. So it's that sort of thing that you never ever promise coverage. In the same way that we don't sell coverage. If you're a big car dealer, you don't get to like say, well, I'm a big car dealer and I'm a boys and girls person, so therefore you must cover this boys and girls event because our buy is related to that on purpose. This also works the other way too, because the sales folks can say, if we cover your business where you've had, right? The sales folks say, well, those news people are crazy. We have nothing to do with what they do. And that's true too. If there is a separation. I get that things cross. I'm on the wall between the two. That's my job. And lots of people are too. But you know what I mean. Other questions?
This is sort of a procedural question, but when sending out press releases and media advisories, do you have any pet peeves about how people do that or recommendations?
Yeah, great question. Because something's come up recently, and it's more, it used to be just a pain in the butt, but now it's a security issue. Is people will send out an email, a press release, and the entire set of information is an attached file. We have lots of training for our corporate parents about internet security and not opening files and attachments. And of course, as news people, we do it all the time. Oh God, it happens every day. But we're becoming more and more, it used to be just a pain because you're like, why don't you just give it to me in the email so I don't have to go through 3 steps here. Now it's a security thing, and I actually had somebody sent something in today that looked just weird enough for me that I deleted it. I'm like, I'm not even gonna open this because it just smelled so much like the security training that I've been getting from corporate about what not to open. And if I don't know you and I don't trust you, don't do it as an entire, you can do the attachment there if you want to. If you have a great PDF and you want to, but also give me all this information in the body of the email itself. Plus that makes it easier for me to cut and paste and send to somebody else. Hey, John, here's a story for Tuesday that put on your radar. Answer your question?
If there's nothing beyond that,
Yeah,
that
I mean, it
makes a
still goes
difference.
back to like, make sure you've got a good phone number on there. Make sure you've got the right contact. It's like little things like that that sometimes fall through, where you just like go back through and make sure that the numbers are correct, that that person's going to be at work on that day, that they're ready to do it, that they know that somebody may be calling and asking for them, that other people in the organization know. If the phone rings and they're asking about this, they need to talk to John or Jane or whomever it is. But we all see it with, I mean, all the stuff we do, we make mistakes in emails, we get the phone number wrong. Now, 3 media people are calling somebody with a phone number that's remarkably simple. And they're probably calling you, yelling at you. Other questions?
I have one.
Oh.
So when the media does come, I'm thinking of a particular event in town, and they did come, and it was wonderful, and it was an event. What should be going on in the head of the person who's going to be speaking to them?
Great question. So what you'll find when that media person shows up, it's probably going to be a reporter by themselves with their camera. You don't see photographers anymore. They're one-man bands, MMJs, multimedia journalists. It's probably going to be a young person. And they will probably have a passing familiarity with what it is that you're involved with in a much deeper way. So anticipate being able to explain this in a simple way. So think about if you were going to explain this to a relatively bright 5th or 6th grader. Like, here's what this is. And if they want to ask more detailed questions, that's fine. So anticipate them needing, and it's all the time, it's like, get me to simple. I had a reporter the other day turned in a great story, but it was so dense with facts that it actually became untenable. I'm like, we need to just kind of dumb this story down a little bit, tell this in a more simple way. So be thinking about that. How do I tell this, how do I explain this simply and briefly? If you're very, very good at this, you learn how to speak in fragments, in short bursts. If you give me this contiguous 200-word answer to a question, I can't use that. There's no line. Most sound bites and stories are between 7 and 12 sentences, or seconds. 7 and 12 seconds. Even when you've given us a nice paragraph, oftentimes we're gonna break that up, just for pacing and the art of how you do television. Print's different. Print can take those long clips. Broadcast we can't. Know that what you say will be edited. People all the time are like, well, you didn't use my whole thing. Well, no, it was a 10-minute interview. The story's a minute long. There's math here. So that means it's incumbent on you, if you have a talking point, figure out 3 different ways to say it. Say the same thing again and again in a different way. Don't get off track. If you have one super important thing to say it 3 times in 3 different ways.
Soundbite.
we've all heard it's like politicians do it, because it's when you ask them about A, they answer about B. And you're like, great. But there's a reason why they do that. They have a talking point that they want to make sure gets there. And if you want to talk about A, and then in your interview you talk about B, C, D, E, and F, there's a now 1 in 6 chance that the soundbite that they're going to get isn't A. And then you're going to be like, well, they didn't do the part I wanted. Well, you gave me B through F, and we, for whatever reason, picked one of those sound bites to use. And know too that a good reporter is going to want to be able to get B-roll, which is video of whatever it is. If they're a well-trained reporter, they're also going to want to get something about what's called nat sound, and that's a layering. And when you're doing a story well, it's these little bits. Think about if you go into if you see a story about a marching band, and you see the trombone going like this, and you don't hear the trombone, you're like, what's wrong with that story? But if there's like great for just 2 seconds, and then it drops down, you're fine. If you run a store and you have a bell on your door, and a reporter that shows up that really knows what they're doing, is going to get 3 shots of that door opening and the bell going. They're going to get you cash register. They're going to look around and go, what can I get? It's nat sound. So know that they're going to spend some of the time taking pictures of stuff. You're like, what are they doing? So think about this. It's like, what is it you need to accomplish, and what is it they're going to try to accomplish? And I will tell you that there's this impression that reporters come in with a hidden agenda. I've seen that, but so rarely as to be almost non-existent. Most reporters will tell you exactly what they're after and why, to a fault. Here's what the story is. What can you tell us about that? So have your talking point to answer that the way that you want to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Brief bursts, anticipate, and be able to speak in simple.
Yeah, and they also may move you around and have you in a different place than you want to interview. And if they're really good and there's only one person they're interviewing, they'll probably interview you in 2 different places. Again, it's the art of what we do. But this is an example. If I was the person that was being interviewed and my reporter came back with this shot, no offense, I'd say that's problematic because it's backlit. And if I had darker skin, I was African American, this would be a real problem. Because now all it is bright light and a face that now you can't see any shadow anymore. So we may turn you around and at the risk of having you squint so that you're facing the sun, so that you're facing the light, because it's going to make you look better. We had that just this past weekend where a person was, it was like one of those shots where they had a bunch of light on one side and not on the other. And I said, you can't actually see their expressions. And I said, this was a person that, it was a good soundbite. It was an important story. They were an important character in this story. I wanted to hear them. I wanted to be able to trust them and believe them. And because I couldn't really see their face, it diminished what they did. And that's a shame because we could have done better with that. So know that they may say, I need you to sit over here as opposed to where you want to. Other questions?
So along those same lines, do we have the opportunity to kind of view some of that video?
Nope.
So
How about that?
however, yeah, because what if this is a fresh out of school reporter and they caught that sideways image that they did not have the skills to pick up on, but if I'm looking at it as an audience member and I look at that and say there's a complete shadow, can we do a do-over?
Oh, yes, you can do that. You can suggest that we stage it someplace else. Hey, I don't want to be backlit.
But I can't look at the video to see how they took the shot, to see how it.
No, you have to sort of do that from looking at it. You don't get to see our notes, you don't get to see our video.
Okay.
Our raw video is protected, even if you came to us with a court order, we're going to fight it and say,
I mean like that deep.
No, but I mean, you don't get to see the story. Well, there's rare exceptions to this. But as a rule, you don't get to see the story before it airs.
Okay.
It's
Now-
not like a commercial.
If
Yeah,
there was
the
only a
exception-
state to the church.
Right.
That's where I come in.
We've had advertisers before in which they've said, you know, we want you to come out and do a story on us, and I have nothing to do with it. Like, they sent it to the news department, and they came out and did a story, and they, for some reason or other, were not 100% thrilled with it because they missed something that they really thought was a really important point in the news story, or they felt like, you know, it could have been longer, or this is not a TV commercial. It is a news story, and the news department is 100% different than the sales department. If you want to put together a commercial, Luke and I can help you with that. But if you want to do a story, you know, you're going to be at the whims of what's happening in the news department. It's something completely different.
Yeah, the only exception, by the way, to we will show you, we'll run a script by you. We may call and ask, or hey, I'm confused, I want to make sure, we can do that and go, here's what we're saying, is this correct? Just as a clarification. The only time that I can remember in my 15, 16 years here that we sent a script to somebody beforehand was something that was an investigative piece that they had been dodging us on, and we sent them the script and said, here's what we're going to report. And we're going to give you one last chance to comment on this. And if you want to throw your 2 cents in, don't say that you were surprised by what we did. Question.
This kind of builds off of where the conversation has been going, but would you ever see a scenario where you would use video from a company or an organization to do a story?
Yeah, that does happen. It becomes a little bit complicated for a variety of reasons too. First of all, copyright clearance. If I take a picture on this phone, I own the copyright to that. You don't own it. Nobody else can take it and use it without express written permission. And that's become a huge legal issue for us. We're very, very careful about that. On top of that, the Federal Communications Commission has rules for broadcasters about video news releases. So if I'm using video from your company, I need to specifically brand it as having been from you in my newscasts. And that becomes enough of a problem that we'll often not do it. We'll say we'll cover that with other video than what you provide for us, even if we've cleared the copyright violation.
Mm-hmm. So even if it's like completely cleared from whatever company that's providing that you have free use to use it, you probably would still use the video.
Our preference is to shoot our own video of all things, but there are some times, for instance, if Dominion is flying helicopters along the power lines to clear the trees, which happens every once in a while around here, don't own a helicopter to go shoot that myself. Dominion may have great video from aerial video of them doing that.
Mm-hmm.
I might use that because it's just something I can't get myself. But it gives me agita whenever a reporter says, oh, we got this great video from this company. There's more problems there than oftentimes benefits.
Okay.
But sometimes, yes.
On the flip side, we've had customers ask us, hey, we had an event that happened during the Fridays After 5, and I noticed that there was news coverage of it. Can we use that video? We don't give that out. Like, our news video is our news video, and we don't give that to people for commercials and that kind of thing.
Other questions? You guys have been great. I know that we're at 1:03, so I completely get that people have things that they may need to go, but I'm happy to stay as long as people have questions. Let me pass this around if everybody, that's sort of the notes that I was working from that fills in whatever you may have written.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, sure.
Folks, before
It's copyrighted.
before folks have to start leaving, I'm Anne Marie, Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for being here today. We've got a couple of friends from the Central Virginia SBDC who also co-hosted this meeting for you guys. I'm trying to get my backlight problem out of the way. This room is hopeless, but if I could grab a photo of you guys, I would really love to do that. It would be not a great photo, that's cool. Oh, big glowing. This is awesome.
Should've worn a dark shirt.
Yeah, so look like an angel, it's perfect. So yes, you all are welcome to stay on top of the David with each other.
Yep, and my email is on there, that's directly to me. If there's ever something you have a question about, here's the deal. Like today, we're all off the record with me until I say we're on the record. Right? So if you have a question, if you have a concern about something, understand that our conversations are always with me. They are always off the record until they're not. And understand with reporters, it's just the opposite. So when you're talking to a reporter, unless you have a specific understanding of this being off the record and what that means, everything you say is on the record.
Dress matters too, on television. Filming wise, isn't there sort of advice on that as like certain colored patterned shirts and things like that?
Yeah, less of an issue. Like a jacket like yours used to be hell on TV cameras. The TV cameras have gotten better. It's not going to have as much motion. Herringbones were terrible for a long time.
Right.
Not so now.
Shirts, that sort of thing.
Now you don't need to be dressed up. Don't tell me that that you don't look fancy enough to be on TV today. You're fine.
Sorry, speaking of being on the record, we did record today's session. Please let me know if there's anything you've said today that you do not want to be shared in public. More likely, we'll probably share a transcript or notes from the session, but those will be available afterwards.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you need parking validation?
No, I
All right, perfect. Thanks for coming.